Good afternoon, members. We have reached the appointed time to start, and I call the meeting to order. This is the Bills Committee on Medical Registration Amendment Bill 2017. First item, the election of chairman. Please refer to our House rules for the nomination of candidates. We need one nominator and one seconder for each valid nomination. Dr. Lo Wai-Kok, I nominate Mr. Tommy Cheung. Any seconder for that nomination? Mr. Yik Chi Ming seconds the nomination. Mr. Cheung, do you accept the nomination? Yes, I do. Do you have a second nomination? Mr. Leong Kok Hong. The speaker's not coming through. Mr. Liu Chang Kong, do we have a seconder? Any seconder for Mr. Liu? No. Once again, do we have a member who seconds the nomination? Dr. Lau Siu Lai. Do you accept the nomination, Mr. Liu? I don't. Any other nomination? Dr. Chiang Chung Tai? Dr. Pierre Chan? Any seconder? Mr. Siu Ka Chun? Dr. Chan, do you accept the nomination? Yes. Do we have a third nomination? Do we have another nomination? Once again, do we have a third nomination? If not, then, well, I will just count to three. 1, 2, 3. So nomination is now closed, and we have two candidates, Mr. Tommy Cheung and Dr. Pierre Chan. We now proceed to the voting procedure. Please distribute ballot papers. Got.
我再提一提大家啦嚇，而家我哋有兩位嘅候選人。
Members, we have two candidates. Number one is Mr. Tommy Cheung. Number two, Dr. Pierre Chan. Our Secretariat staff is now distributing the ballot papers and the chalk to you.
如果大家咧係喺票上高係蓋章。
Please affix the chalk to the ballot paper, and then I would announce that voting is closed and no more ballot paper will be issued, and the ballot papers will then be collected. You have to deposit your ballot paper personally into the box, and before you do that, please do not leave your seat. Again, may I remind members that number one is Mr. Tommy Cheung and number two, Dr. Pierre Chan.
由於係唔係記名投票咧，請大家俾佢將選票咧向其他人展示。
Since this is not a secret, this is a secret ballot procedure. Please do not show the ballot paper to anyone, and please also fold it before you deposit it into the box.
好，請問大家有冇對於蓋章嘅程序有問任何嘅
Any questions about the procedures to affix the chalk to the ballot paper? Has any member not yet received a ballot paper? No? Okay. If all members have affixed their chalks to their ballot papers. I declare the voting procedure now closed, and no more ballot papers should be issued by our Secretariat. How many ballot papers have been issued? Altogether, 30 ballot papers have been issued, and we're now going to collect the ballot papers.
May
I also remind or inform members that after this voting procedure is completed and the ballot papers are counted, they will be destroyed by the Secretariat staff.
好啦，我哋收妥晒啲選票咯，
嗬。Have we collected all the ballot papers?
好，收晒啦嘛。咁我哋請阿盧偉國議員同埋
Dr. Lu Wai Kwok and Dr. Cheng Chung Tai, would you please come onto the stage to supervise the counting?
咁我哋都係收咗30張選票嘅。
Where we have collected 30 ballot papers. Number 2, number 1, number 1, number 2, number 1, number 1, number 1, number 2, number 1, 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 number 2, number 1, number 1, number 1, number 2, number 1, number 2, number 2, number 2, number 1, number 2, number 2, number 2, number 1. Here's the result. Mr. Tommy Cheung has scored 19 votes. Dr. Pierre Chen, number 2, 11 votes. So Mr. Tommy Cheung is elected chairman of the Bills Committee. Members, do we want to elect a deputy chairman? Any nomination? Ms. Claudia Mote, I nominate Dr. Pierre Chen. Any seconder? Mr. Tam. Jeremy Tam seconds the nomination. Do you accept the nomination, Dr. Chen? Yes, I do. And I nominate Mr. Nathan Lau. Any other nomination? And I will count to 3 as Mr. Leung Yu-chung did. 1, 2. Any more nominations? 3. So nomination is now closed. We have 2 candidates. Now we would issue.
我宣布現在咧以不記名嘅方式進行。
This is done in the form of secret ballot. Every member in attendance will be given a ballot paper and a chalk with the tick sign. And then when I announce that the voting is closed, then no more ballot paper will be issued, and the secret ballot papers will then be collected. Members are required to deposit their ballot papers into the box, and before you have done so, please don't leave your seat. And every candidate is given a number in accordance with the order of nomination made. So number 1 is Dr. Pierre Chen, and number 2 is Mr. Lau Kwok Fan. Please affix the chalk with the tick side against the number of your choice. This is secret ballot. Please don't show your ballot paper to anyone. You may want to fold the ballot paper, but there's no need to press it before you deposit your ballot paper. Has anyone not yet received a ballot paper? If not, then the voting is now closed. No more ballot paper will be issued. I've just announced that no more ballot paper will be issued. How many have been issued? 22.
咁而家請工作人員開始收回選票。
Please collect the ballot papers. Members, please deposit your ballot paper into the ballot box yourself, and please don't leave your seat before you have done so.
請兩位提名嘅
Could the 2 nominators please come over here to monitor the counting process? Number 2. 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 Number 2.
Number 2. Number 2. Number 2. Number 1. Number 1. Number 1. Number 1. Number 1. Number 2. Number 1. Number 2. I announce the result. Candidate number 1, Dr. Pierre Chan, has received 6 votes. Number 2, Mr. Edward Lau, has received 16 votes. I announce that Mr. Edward Lau is elected Deputy Chairman of the Bills Committee. Shall we invite the administration to join us?
我哋好唔好定咗個時間 deputation？ OK， 問下佢哋先啦，好嘛？各位同事，我
Members, I think we will need a public hearing. The clerk has identified 2 time slots, 11th of July at 5 p.m. or 15th of July, Saturday at 9 a.m. Which one would you prefer? Tuesday? My only concern about Tuesday is that if there are too many deputations and individuals, we will have to finish late. Yes, Dr. Chen? Do you think that there will be additional Finance Committee meetings? I think it will be better to have the afternoon of a Tuesday, because I think there will be additional FC meetings on Saturdays. Yes, it's very likely that there will be additional FC meetings. Well, there will be 2 meetings and members just go back and 2. Well, if there are no objections, let's say 11th of July, Tuesday. What time? 5. We will start at 5. My only concern is that if there are too many people, then we may be here for 4 hours. I think at the same time there will be the housing panel. Well, let's set it on the 11th of July first. I'll introduce the administration. I won't give the introduction every time. Well, I nearly got the name wrong. We have Head Healthcare Planning and Development Office of the Food and Health Bureau, Mr. Chris Sun. Principal Assistant Secretary for Food and Health, Mr. Fong Ngai. Assistant Secretary for Food and Health, Ms. Natalie Lau. Secretary, Medical Council of Hong Kong Department of Health, Ms. Lisa Lai, and also Deputy Secretary, Medical Council of Department of Health, Mr. Joseph Siu, who is to take us through the paper. Perhaps I will present the bill first. Well, the credibility and also efficiency of the Medical Council has been under public scrutiny. So far, there are about 900 caseloads in the backlog. So from the receipt of complaints to the conduct of disciplinary hearings, it will usually take about 6 years. So amending the medical registration ordinance is very much needed, and it also meets public aspiration. The Medical Registration Amendment Bill 2016 has lapsed last year. Afterwards, the government has established a tripartite platform inviting representatives of doctors, patients' rights, and also LegCo to give views about the operation and legislative amendments to the Medical Council. They tried to forge consensus. They've had 4 meetings. They have taken into account the current operation of the Medical Council. They've taken into account experience of UK, Australia, and also Singapore. They discussed about the legislative amendments to improve the composition of the Medical Council, as well as the mechanism of the setting up of inquiry of this hearing panels and relevant mechanism. The 2016 bill has lapsed. However, we have had sufficient time to draft this bill. The last Bills Committee had 10 meetings, receiving over 40 submissions from deputations and individuals, and the government has prepared about 30 information papers in response. On a number of occasions, the government has listened to the comments of various organizations, say, for example, Medical Association, patients groups, the Hong Kong Medical Association, and in the LegCo, the debate lasted for over 30 hours. The 2016 bill is based on the original proposal of the 2016 bill and also comments that we have received. We have taken into account the concerns expressed, views expressed in the tripartite platform. We have collated their views as well. There are 3 main objectives of the 2016 bill. First is to improve the complaints and disciplinary hearing mechanism. 2, to increase lay membership in the Medical Council of Hong Kong to increase credibility and accountability. Number 3, to enable the Medical Council to approve applications for limited registration for a period from not exceeding 1 year to not exceeding 3 years. And I would like to further elaborate on that. First, to improve the complaint investigation and disciplinary inquiry mechanism of the Medical Council of Hong Kong, MC Hong Kong. Currently, because of the restrictions in the law, there can only be one legal advisor in the MC Hong Kong, and every time, because of the requirement of presence of the legal advisor, so at any one time there can only be one disciplinary hearing taking place. The Department of Justice cannot engage other councils to appear on its behalf. It has added to the workload, and it worsened the clogging up of workload. We would like to increase flexibility of the mechanism to complete and process complaints and hearings. Comparing the 2016 and the 2017 bills, the 2017 bill is more flexible. It will unclog the bottleneck. And under the MCHK, there is a modern mechanism separated from the auspice of the MCHK. Under the bill, it says that there can be more than one preliminary inquiry committee. And PIC is comprised of 4 doctors and 3 lay members as quorum. The term of the PIC and reappointment will be aligned to no more than 12 months. Under the bill, it is also proposed that assessors may be appointed to PIC and also inquiry panels, IPs, and the MCHK may also decide the qualification and also experience required of assessors. There is a schedule proposed. In the schedule, it says that organizations to nominate lay assessors and professional assessors. The pool of assessors has increased from 14 to a maximum of 140. The term is also increased to 3 years. The hearings will no longer be conducted by the MCHK. There will be a separate inquiry panel. The MCHK may appoint inquiry panels to conduct hearings. The composition of the IP will be 3 doctors and 2 lay members. The power of taking disciplinary actions will also be transferred to the IP in inquiry panels. Apart from the legal officer, the DOJ may appoint solicitor or barristers to perform its duty. Under the bill, it also says that there may be more than 1 legal advisor to the MCHK. In relation to the composition of the MCHK, similar to the 2016 bill, the 2017 bill proposes to increase the number of lay members by 4, that is, from 4 to 8. The additional 4 lay members do not have to be appointed by the Chief Executive. 3 of them will be elected by patient-related organizations. 1 is to be nominated by the Consumer Council. In relation to doctor members, we consider that the Academy of Medicine is a professional body that is empowered to award professional qualifications. We propose that the 2 members from the Academy of Medicine, from nomination to election and appointment by the Chief Executive is not required. Our proposal would increase the number of doctor members, and also the elected number of doctors will also account for half of it, and the number of professional doctors will account for 75%. Lay members will be increased from 14% to 25%. Elected members will account for half of the total number of members. Elected members plus the 1 nominated by Consumer Council, not required by will account for 2/3 of the number of members, and appointed members will account for 1/3 of the total number of members. We think that this has responded to the trade's concern that doctor members should account for half of the composition.
And in relation to limited registration, like the 2016 bill, the 2017 bill would extend the period of limited registration from not exceeding 1 year to not exceeding 3 years. This, I have to stress, that this is not going to affect the requirements and standards to be applied by the MCHK in relation to the assessment of limited registration applications. And there are also amendments pertaining to the disciplinary powers of the MCHK. And I think I should pause here, and I welcome views from members. Thank you for this introduction, which is succinct, but all the important amendments have been highlighted. 2 members would like to speak. including Dr. Pierre Chen, Ms. Leung Yu Chung, and Dr. Cheng Chung Tai. Every member will have 5 minutes to speak. Dr. Chen, I have a question, first of all, on limited registration first. Doctors want to see a reform. We don't want to see a repeat of what we saw last year. So I want to assure the administration about this first. I will need to clarify certain issues of this bill because between two legislative amendment exercises, we will be expecting some 20 years so on limited registration, I have dug out some information. It said that we are short of 200 to 300 doctors, and we need to therefore allow more to be registered under the limited registration scheme. We have been told that in the past 5 years, 330 applicants have submitted their applications. But the HA only submitted 30 or so, or under 30 applications to the MCHK. This is open information in the public domain. So more than 300 applicants applied, but then the HA screened out some 300 of them, and then the HA talk about shortage of manpower. So perhaps we should ask the HA to explain why they have screened out so many candidates, and then they complained about a shortage of doctors. The HA, through the limited registration system, would look at areas of work and specialties where there is demand. They have stringent requirements. For that particular specialty, there must be, first of all, an actual shortage of doctors, and the doctors and relevant staff members will be consulted. And the HA has introduced stringent criteria. First of all, the applicant must have at least 3 years of experience in practicing medicine, and the qualification he or she holds must be at the level of intermediary professional registration level. So yes, there were many applicants, but the HA must consider whether they are qualified in accordance with the criteria of HA, and then if so, the applications will be submitted to the MCHK for approval. According to the electrical brief, HCR 1 F3261 92 in the this is the big document we have, and there's an annex on the system of HA. There's nothing mentioned here about the system which Mr. Sun has just talked about. Can we be given the information as you have just said? We can provide the information in due course later. We know that members are very concerned about the limited registration. That's why we have tried to provide more information about the mechanism, including the employment of limited registration doctors by HA, as well as those employed by the 2 universities. So we set up the relevant information in the paper. But of course, we can provide additional information if members required it. There are people, and we have conducted questionnaire surveys that about the concern that limited registration is a system which does not require training or practicum. So I would like to know why these 300 or so applicants were screened out by HA. We would like to get something in writing about the screening process. Yes, we can provide the information later. As I've said, overseas doctors who would like to be employed by the HA through limited registration, they have to fulfill certain criteria, as I've just said. Dr. Cheng Chung Tai, I'm not a doctor, but as a citizen, as someone who has some common sense, we find something rather strange. My concern is the same as Dr. Pierre Chen. Why is it there's no requirement for these limited registration doctors to sit any examination or to do any practicum training? And also, why do you want to extend the period of limited registration from not exceeding 1 year to not exceeding 3 years? What are the factors that you have considered? Under the medical registration ordinance, there are 4 types of registration. First, full registration. That is for graduates of the medical faculties in Hong Kong. And then we have also provisional registration for the first year. For non-local trained doctors, they can come to work in Hong Kong through 2 systems. First, by taking the licentiate examination of MCHK, and then they have to do the practicum. And the other channel is through limited registration. Under the ordinance, there is no requirement on practicum training. On the question of limited registration, you want to extend the period from not exceeding 1 year to not exceeding 3 years. What factors have you considered in setting this period? The only change is in respect of the period of limited registration that the MCHK can decide is a period from not exceeding 1 year to not exceeding 3 years. Well, the assessment criteria will not be changed. The only thing that's changed is the period of limited registration. In the past, because the maximum period was 1 year, so the certainty was affected. The contract could not be longer than 1 year, and then they need to submit a renewal application. If we extend the period from 1 year to not exceeding 3 years, then the overseas doctors who may have to bring the whole family with the children to work in Hong Kong, there will be more certainty. You have to understand that for an overseas doctor who may have already worked in another country for many, many years, so if you tell them that you can only be offered a 1 year contract if they come to work in Hong Kong, so many of them will not be willing to do that. But if you offer them a longer period, I understand that. So in a nutshell, you want to improve the incentive for overseas doctors. If it's 1 year, they may be worried when how long the employment would last. If it's 3 years, they think that they would be given a longer employment period. Yes, this would of course be an additional attractive factors. Can I regard limited registration as a provisional license? They're not going to be a fully registered doctor someday. Am I right? No, they won't. Only the HA, the Department of Health, and the 2 universities can apply for limited registration for these doctors. Do you have a maximum number of renewals? At present, the law mandates that for every time is for no more than 1 year. Yes, can they be? Well, in the past, maybe they would work in Hong Kong for 5 or 8 years, and that's it. But now it is for every time is for 3 years, so they may be working in Hong Kong for more than, say, 10 years. A number of factors are relevant here. First, the employer, the employing organization, must submit the application for renewal, and the MCHK must approve it. So every time the case will be assessed on its merit at the time. So in other words, the answer to your question is maybe. Mr. Leung Yiu Chung. There are 3 objectives. First, to improve the complaint investigation mechanism. Second, to increase the lay membership of the Medical Council of Hong Kong. And also the third objective is to improve, to allow the doctors to have a limited registration period not exceeding 3 years. Last year, I'd make a proposal to bring in overseas doctors, and that is we can have a independent investigation body, not an inquiry panel or setting up inquiry panels under the MCHK. I want to make sure that the assessors and the members of the inquiry committees would concentrate on this area of disciplinary inquiry and not something else. And I believe this would allow wider participation in the work of the inquiry committee. And Dr. Ko, in his final speech on the bill, said that this is not something that could not be further considered. And why are you still introducing a similar arrangement here through this new bill? The biggest difference between the 2016 bill and this one is about the complaint investigation and disciplinary inquiry mechanism. In the last bill, we still propose that the MCHK will be conducting the hearings. That is, the hearings are conducted by MCHK, but now we want to have some inquiry panels set up under MCHK. We have actually looked at the different arrangements in other countries. For example, in the UK and Australia, the systems are separate. But Singapore is different. Under the Medical Council, they have an independent mechanism to do this. After the discussion of tripartite platform and having weighed the pros and cons, we believe that at this stage, setting up inquiry panels under MCHK would be a better option. MCHK will not participate in the hearing of disciplinary matters, but MCHK will be involved in the appointment of members and the chairman of the inquiry panels. And once that's done, all the powers and functions will be discharged by the inquiry panels. Doing this would solve a major problem. Last time, because of the limited number of members of MCHK, we can only set up limited number of inquiry committees. But now both the members of the MCHK and the chairman can participate in this work. So we can have 140, as many as 140 assessors. And then if we add members of MCHK, we'll have a total pool of 172 assessors. And every IP inquiry panel requires only 5 members. So we can set up concurrently many IPs to hear the complaints.
Yes, in theory, it sounds right. You have 140 people, lay members, and there are also some that is within the MCHK, so there will be a total of 172. So there is always a chance that some people will have to take up the work of the MCHK and at the same time dealing with work related to a hearing. So it's not completely independent. There are 2 pools of people, but some of them overlap. Well, the inquiry panel or the PIC is still, the member will also be within the pool. So there's also always a chance that there will be overlapping. Yes, members may participate in a hearing. We think that this is a more appropriate approach. Well, as soon as an IP, that is the inquiry panel, is set up, then the MCHK is no longer involved in it. Yes, the MCHK has the decision to make as to who to appoint to the IP, but once it's set up, it operates completely independently. But it is a panel under the MCHK. Does it have to report to the MCHK? It says very clearly that the IP's decision is final. So do they have to explain themselves to the MCHK? No need. Of course, the MCHK may ask questions about administration, but it's made clear under the bill that the decision of the IP is final. Of course, you may lodge an appeal with the appeals court. Next, Ms. Claudia Mo. I want to ask, when it comes to doctors of limited registration, they don't have to sit for the examinations nor go through practical training, and they all come from overseas. But when it comes to overseas, you include doctors from the mainland. Is that right? Under the medical registration ordinance, if you are not a graduate of the Faculty of Medicine of the 2 universities, and if you want to practice, you have to either sit an examination or do it through limited registration. That means if you want to come to work in Hong Kong and you come from outside Hong Kong, then you may do it through limited registration. So the question was whether it applies to doctors from the mainland. I understand a simple yes will do, and I do find the wording rather ridiculous. Overseas, but you always say that Hong Kong is part of China. That is connected. It's physically connected, so there's nothing overseas. This is a misrepresentation, but I don't think it's you. I don't think it's you. In December last year, there was an opinion poll done by the Hong Kong U of the general public. It says that, well, to increase the number of doctors by way of limited registration, i.e., allowing doctors to practice without sitting an examination, 14% of the respondents supported it. 78% of the respondents opposed to it. That is the public sentiment. The main concern was that changing it from not exceeding 1 year to not exceeding 3 years is to open the gate for mainland doctors. Last year, we expressed the same concern, and you ignored us. So I want to ask, Can you honestly differentiate it, say Commonwealth or those recognized by the Medical Council, UK, Australia, the US, Canada? Can you give us a breakdown and differentiate between the different amongst the different places? Non-locally trained doctors and limited registration. That's the differentiation. Well, yes, the public are concerned about where these limited registration doctors came from. In the brief in Annex E, we have set out the information, namely the doctors of limited registration recruited by the hospital authority, where they obtain their medical qualifications, and doctors of limited registration recruited to teach in the 2 universities where they came from. What are their qualifications? There are about 29 of them that work in the hospital authority. You will see the information in the table. You see that none of them come from the mainland. Usually they come from the UK, Australia, New Zealand, the United States, and Canada. We have also set out the limited registration doctors being recruited by the 2 universities and where they come from. Yes, I understand. I hope that you will always make the information readily available so that people can easily find it. I think it's a matter of perception. You change it from not exceeding 1 year to not exceeding 3 years. So if it's a renewal of contract, then you have 6 years and you live here for another year, then you are a permanent resident. So is it something to do with importing professionals? These are 2 different matters. This is not import or admission of overseas professionals. I understand, but it's a matter of perception. Well, I think it's not catered for doctors who are already practicing in overseas countries, say US, UK, Australia. You tailor-made this to facilitate mainland doctors to come to practice in Hong Kong. We are concerned about unclarities. Well, doctors of limited registration recruited by the HA, they're required to have a certain years of experience and they have to obtain specialist qualifications. Maybe not all of it, but at least they have to meet the standard of an interim examination, not a full qualification. Those doctors who have met the qualification can't possibly come from the mainland because currently they can't attain that information. So all those who have met the qualification would be coming from areas that have a similar system, mainly from the UK, US, Australia, and New Zealand. So the doctors come from these places, and they are not fresh graduates. They already have a number of years in experience. So can you just answer Ms. Mo's question? Changing it to not exceeding 3 years is not and can't possibly be a measure to facilitate mainland doctors to come to Hong Kong. You see that the MCHK is still the gatekeeper. The standard remains. The only thing changed is that it's changed to no more than 3 years. Well, if they are not sure about giving 3 years, then it can be kept to no more than 1 year. what we try to deal with is that for some discipline in public hospitals, there is a shortage of doctors, and there is public aspiration to increase the number of doctors, and we have to keep the gate that they have to have specialist qualification. And if you have specialist qualification, then surely you will be coming from places other than the mainland. Ms. Elena Wong. The Democratic Party and the Liberal Party worked very hard in the last legislative year to try to get a reform of the Medical Council. We welcome the 3 general directions, that is to improve the complaint, investigation and disciplinary inquiry mechanism of the MCHK, to increase lay membership by 4 members. Of course, we would welcome more than 4 additional members, because currently, even with additional 4, there are only 8. So lay members are still the minority. But if you think that by adding 4, you can still strike a balance, we welcome that. In relation to limited registration, it's changed from no more than 1 year to no more than 3 years. We understand that perhaps some doctors who already have family members overseas and they have to relocate to Hong Kong, they may not be willing to do so just for 1 year. I have 2 questions. First, about the time period. Members of MCHK, I read that each term is 3 years. They can be reappointed. Well, there is a 6-year rule. I don't know whether it's an explicit rule or not. Appointments to various bodies will not last forever. So, after 3 years, there is a reappointment, or the member is re-elected, and after that, it's already 6 years. Is it the case that the administration would not want them to continue to be a member after that? In Annex B, during this stage of disciplinary hearing, disciplinary inquiry stage and the preliminary inquiry committee, PIC, and assessors, the term is no more than 12 months. So the term is different from the membership of MCHK. So why are the considerations different? That is the PIC and the assessors. Well, if that person is elected or nominated by an organization to be a member, then the 6-year rule does not apply. The 6-year rule only applies to government-appointed members to advisory committees. So if that person is elected or nominated by relevant organizations to be a member of the MCHK, 6-year rule doesn't apply.
And secondly, I thank Dr. Wong for looking so closely at the term. If it's MCHK, the term is 3 years. If it's you are an assessor, the term is also 3 years. But for the PIC, the maximum is 12 months. This is in the current ordinance. But the exception for lay members is 3 months. We want to align the terms of both doctor members and lay members. Well, you know, the work of the PIC is really hard. It's hard. It's an appointment that requires a lot of hard work. So the time period is, the term is 12 months. Is solely because of the difficulty. Because these are really conscientious members. Members of PIC, because they are volunteers. And also, they may have to accumulate some experience. They may not know a lot at first, and then they would gain some experience. But then it's already time to say goodbye, and you have to find another batch of PIC members and to train them again. Would that affect the work of the PIC? If they are willing to serve again, the membership can continue. Well, the 12-month term is proposed because of the sheer workload, because some members may wish to be reappointed, but we want to give the members a choice to accept it for a second term or not. But in that case, you don't have to specify 12 months as the maximum. And you say nothing about whether the member can be reappointed or renewed. Or this in the bill. But in Annex B, it's not a requirement. Well, we have simplified the arrangement. To be exact, the 12-month terms can be renewed again and again. Ms. Alice Mack. Mr. Sun, please tell us how you appoint limited registration doctors. You should tell the public how this is done. We know, but we'd like to take advantage of this meeting to tell the public that only the 2 universities and hospital authority can employ these doctors under limited registration, and who will be assessing their qualifications. Because there are people who are concerned that some so-called barefoot doctors from the mainland would be employed to work as doctors in Hong Kong. I will give you a few minutes to explain to the public what this is about. So is it that we admit doctors of all shapes and abilities? Let me explain. The HA has a very stringent employment mechanism for the employment of limited registration doctors. First of all, they will have assessed the manpower situation of the different specialties. They will look at the departmental structure. They will also consult the professional bodies. They consult the doctors in their consultative committees. And when the relevant specialty or unit or department submit an application and with the agreement of the central coordinating unit, they will only trigger the employment procedure. So first of all, there must be an assessment of the shortage, and then they have the selection panel from. They have a representative from MCHK, sent from the headquarters of HA, the Central Coordination Committee of HA, and HA would also assess the qualification. They want to get overseas doctors with the intermediary specialist intermediate specialty qualification. So you have people representing the different specialties of the HA. They are not MCHK people. There are different colleges from the MCHK, and their representative would play a part in the employment of these doctors. We all know that in our public hospitals, our doctors are under stress because of the heavy workload, and it's hoped that through the extension of the registration period from 1 year to 3 years for these doctors for limited registration, we can employ more such doctors. And I've heard from some public hospital doctors, when the term was 1 year, they will have to leave after getting used to the hospital environment, and they may not come again because that would require another application and another assessment procedure. As I've said in other meetings, I hope the HA should come out and provide some information and background information on the employment of these doctors. These doctors are mainly employed to do clinical duties, and the promotion prospects of local doctors will not be affected. These doctors are mainly deployed to provide service to patients. And we have been talking about this bill since the last term, and there have been some latest changes, especially in respect of the PIC. There's a backlog of 900-odd cases, and the average time taken for each case to be dealt with is 72 months. In such a highly developed community like Hong Kong, I don't think no one would like to see the cases being dealt with so slowly. Thank you, Ms. Mack. The limited registration doctors employed by the HA are all deployed to work at the front line in specialties where there is a shortage of doctors, and they are all at the front lines providing clinical services. Mr. Junius Ho, I support the proposed amendments, increasing the membership of MCHK to 32, and lay members would also be significantly increased in terms of transparency and the lay participation. It would be more transparent, given that there are suspicions about these issues being handled behind closed door by MCHK, and they protect their own people. And I would like to refer to Annex E, Mr. Sun. In 2016, in respect of limited registration, 134 doctors were admitted. They were employed by CUHK, Hong Kong U, and HA, and also in some clinics of HA. 52 are employed by CUHK, 13 from UK, 11 from mainland China, and for Hong Kong U, they employed 27, 8 from UK, and 7 from the mainland. So it's not as suggested by Ms. Claudia Mo that this will open the door for mainland doctors. And the registration is assessed according to the same criteria. And there are 2 representatives from MCHK, and there are 7 representatives from Hong Kong Medical Association, and 10 from DOH, CUHK, HA, and then 8 lay members. So altogether, we have 32 members. First of all, the transparency is high, and the requirements are high, and it's not really about opening the door for doctors from certain places. And for 134 of them, if we do not count those employed by CUHK and HKU, Hong Kong U, there are only 57 employed by the HA. But these doctors are employed for frontline clinical duties. They will not be allowed to work outside as medical practitioners. In Tuen Mun Hospital, there are only 57. So how much good can they do given the shortage? So we should open up the system to meet the needs of, to satisfy the needs of local people. Do you have an objective on or indicator on how much more will be employed? Thank you, Mr. Ho. We don't have 50-odd doctors employed by HA. According to the table, there are 14. And before 1964, some mainland doctors came to work in Hong Kong, and they have to work in specified clinics. They are also doctors with a limited registration. So for HA employed doctors with limited registration, there are only 14. So how many more would you like to employ to meet the needs in the medical sector? Do you have any strategy to achieve the objective? Mr. Sun, it's difficult to set an indicator. The fact remains that there is a shortage of doctors in the HA. So if you have different proposals, if you've got other proposals to employ more such doctors, we are all ears. But of course, not all overseas doctors will be interested in coming to work in Hong Kong, although the extension of the term from 1 to 3 years would help. So I just want you to work harder on this front. In 2012, there were 12, then 12, 13, 14. So how many are employed by HA? 2016, there are 14. But then are we talking about some duplications of the doctors employed from year to year? The table tells us the situation at the end of 2016. There were 14, and now we have 17. There were 11 in 2012. 2013, there were 18. Do we have we duplicated any such doctors? Or are we talking about newly registered doctors? Well, both. Some have their registration renewed, some were newly recruited. Can you check the figures in the past few years? Ms. Claudia Mo asked the question whether the registration can be renewed for up to, say, 30 years and they will become local residents. Yes, we can provide further details. And also, when we talk about the number of doctors, do we have any double counting or duplications, or do we have any doctors who worked for the third or fourth year? The registration has to be renewed annually under the current system, and in the future, every 3 years, right? Yes, it's renewed by MCHK. The maximum now is 1 year, and the maximum in the future will be 3 years. What about the universities? If they are doing some teaching in the universities or clinical research, then the universities will have to submit the applications to MCHK for limited registration. Yes, correct. The renewal applications from the university will have to be assessed by the MCHK for approval. So the universities can decide whether to submit applications, but it's for the MCHK to decide whether the registration should be allowed. So it will be done every 3 years by the universities. The application would be submitted by the universities, but MCHK has the final say. But we do keep records about doctors. So how many are registered
由呢一個大學去幫佢申請嗰啲醫生。
How many doctors are employed by the universities? How many applications are filed by universities? Yes.
一個數字我。
Can you give me the figure then? That's renewal annually. What is the maximum period? Can we give the information afterwards? We have the information, we have to get it from the MCHK. My biggest concern is that for these limited registration doctors, they don't have to go through the MCHK licentiate examination. They just said to the service provider that the service provider said that they need doctors. Right. If it's limited registration, they don't have to go through the examination. Well, the organization that recruits the doctors and the MCHK would both think that allowing them to work in Hong Kong would benefit Hong Kong and that they are up to standard. Yes. Yes, the MCHK and the recruiting organization both think that they would meet the qualification required. That means they can't practice. They can't work in a hospital. They can't practice in Hong Kong. They can only conduct research work. If it's recruited as a professor in a faculty of medicine, well, other than the teaching, there may be some other work. Say, for example, some clinical work. Well, there is one Hong Kong U professor. He was removed from office because he did not make a declaration after performing an operation. It's not relevant. So if a university recruits that person to work in Hong Kong in an academic capacity, that person can still practice medicine in Hong Kong. And I think, well, they can work in the two teaching hospitals, that is Queen Mary and Prince of Wales hospitals. It's not the case that they can practice medicine in Hong Kong anywhere. You don't have to be so anxious. I'm not. So I will get to the point. They cannot practice medicine outside the two teaching hospitals. Well, the requirement of the limited registration is that they can only serve in the organization that recruits them, not anywhere else. They can't open their own clinic, so that there is a restriction. They can only serve the organization. If that person practices medicine and not work as an academic, then that person has to work in that organization, right? What if the organization allows them to practice outside? Well, the two universities have very stringent requirements. No, that's not what I meant. Any possibility. If you can't answer, ask the university to answer. Mr. Soon. Well, professors recruited under limited registration can only work as specific duties, teaching, research, and related clinical work. Can you wait till second round? Yes, Dr. Pierre Chen. Second round. Thank you. Well, every time I will come prepared. I want to ask my questions first. You said you would give us information after the meeting. Let me give you the information now, because the administration has already given me the figures. Well, the administration said that limited registration is very stringent. So I would like to give you some information in the Legislative Brief Annex 6. And it says that The Hong Kong U and the CUHK in terms of recruitment, system procedures, and monitoring and monitoring. I know that they are very stringent for the three places. When it comes to initiation of recruitment and system, they are very different. The way for them to recruit overseas doctors, the three places are different. Monitoring, they are different. So, you said it's very stringent. There is only one way to get limited registration. You have to make an application from the MCHK. If it's so stringent, how come the three places are so different in their procedure? Thank you. The law requires that if you want to apply for limited registration, you have to get an approval from the MCHK. When it comes to initiation, recruitment, and monitoring, they are to be set by the universities because there is academic autonomy. The government can't possibly control recruitment and monitoring. The HA has their own way. The two universities have their own ways, and it shows that the organizations will take into account their own needs before setting down their rules and regulations. They are not required by the law, but set down taking into account their own needs. The gatekeeper is the MCHK. We can't specify to the two universities how to use the limited registration. We respect academic autonomy. What's important to the government is that under the medical registration ordinance, if you want to apply for limited registration, you have to get an approval from the MCHK. Dr. Chan, any follow-up? Yes. I would like to get more information, especially for the two universities. The monitoring. The HA has it written down very clearly, and from the information you provided us, the information provided by the two universities differs greatly. Now I want to answer members' question. Someone asked, how many renewals has there been maximum? In March, I asked a question seeking an oral answer. The administration answered us. It's a question seeking a written answer. How many people has their renewals for 10 years, for more than 10 years? Well, about half of them, 50 or so, that have had their limited registration renewed for more than 10 years. Over 20 years, 50. That's the information contained in the written reply to a question seeking a written reply in the council. And well, there was a question: how come from the 100 limited registered doctors, how come only 50 work for the HA? I can answer you. Only about 10 or so of them worked in the hospital authority. Not all of them work in the front line. And it says in the reply to my question that out of the 10 doctors working in the hospital authority, 2 of them worked for about 15 to 20 years. I don't think they will still be frontline doctors. If you have an experience of 15 years in the HA, you will be a senior consultant or a consultant. I just want you to be careful with your answer because you have already given the figures previously. Anything to reply, Mr. Soon? Yes. Well, the reply provided to Mr. Chan, the Dr. Chan's question, for those who have had their renewals for more than 20 years, they are mostly those that arrived in Hong Kong before 1964 from the mainland. There is a group of doctors who came to Hong Kong from the mainland before 1964. Well, of course, the period is long because they're already in the 70s and 80s. For the two universities, only two that have had their registration renewed for 20 years plus. Indeed, there are two doctors, limited registration doctors working in the HA. In the past 2 years, because of shortage in doctors, we have to meet demand. We recruited limited registration doctors. They work in the front line. So if you look at the figures, yes, there are two doctors working in the HA, working for a longer period of time with multiple renewals, working here for various reasons. And that is in relation to the manpower shortage in the past few years. We have to make use of the limited registration to recruit overseas doctors working as frontline doctors. Dr. Cheng Chung Tai speaking for the second time. There are many areas that we can discuss in this bill. We won't talk about composition of the MCHK. I do think that the limited registration is a strange thing. I can't explain how come that overseas doctors, including mainland doctors, the validity period will be increased to no more than 3 years. And for locally trained doctors, they can only register for 1 year, even though they have sat multiple examinations and received training here. For Hong Kong, for local doctors, the registration period is 1 year. For overseas doctors, because you want to attract them, you extend the limited registration to no more than 3 years. Our professionals here, doctors, lawyers, they have their registration extended year by year. But when it comes to overseas doctors, you increase the period to no more than 3 years. How do you explain that? Thank you, Dr. Chang, for your question. It's a very good question indeed. You should look at it the other way around. For local graduates, they're not subject to any restrictions. So in theory, once they have obtained the medical qualification, they will become doctors. It's just that every year they have to pay $405 to obtain a registration practicing certificate. It is not the case that the MCHK can refuse it. As long as you pay $405, the MCHK will have to issue you with a practicing certificate. However, under limited registration, the MCHK can decide whether to renew your registration or not. Nothing to do with whether payment is made. And once the for local doctors, you pay $405, and then you will get the practicing certificate. But you can't distort the registration of doctors as a working visa, work visa. But that's not what he said. But what he said practically is that you pay $405, you can practice in Hong Kong. Well, you can accuse the MCHK for committing daylight robbery for charging $405 a year. What I'm trying to say is that if you are a locally trained doctor, then you have full registration. You don't need to ask for renewal from the MCHK, but under the medical registration ordinance, every year you are required to obtain a practicing certificate, and you have to make a payment. It's $405 currently. As long as you make payment, you will be given the certificate, no questions asked. I think it's back to the fundamental. It's a professional registration system left by the colonial days. You can't simplify it and turn it into a membership.
當時嘅醫委會有權唔用係一件事。
Whether the MCHK exercise the power is another matter. MCHK has to monitor the quality and the competency of doctors. Every year there's a review. Now you want to do this every 3 years. And would there be annual appraisal of these doctors with limited registration? If not, then every year there will be a review for local doctors.
議員提呢個問題，本地嘅醫生係冇。
There's no assessment whatsoever for local doctors. So unless there's a complaint against the doctor, followed by a hearing, and the MCHK rules that he's professionally negligent and he's delisted, for locally trained doctors, there's no so-called renew. Every year they just pay the fee for the practicing certificate and it can be renewed indefinitely. But for doctors with limited registration, you have to go back to ask the MCHK to consider your renewal application. The MCHK can decide whether to grant you the renewal. For local trained doctors, there's no reassessment review. They can be doctors in Hong Kong. The payment of $405 is just an administrative requirement. But for doctors with limited registration, first of all, the MCHK can decide whether your application can be renewed or should be renewed. The MCHK has a say. But for locally trained doctors, well, you cannot, the MCHK cannot really say no. But of course, if I'm already 90 years old, I decide not to practice anymore, then I don't pay the fee anymore. But for limited registration doctors, every time the MCHK can decide whether to grant you the renewal. And we are saying that at most the period for limited registration is 3 years. MCHK can decide whether it should be 3 years or a shorter period. But every year, the doctors with limited registration must apply for renewal. Can you please tell Dr. Chang that even for these overseas doctors, if they are extended for 3 years, do they have to pay $405 a year? Yes. For locally trained doctors, once you have graduated and registered, you are a doctor forever. But for the doctors with limited registration, you have to apply for renewal every year, and this only after the approval has been granted that you will be allowed to practice for another year. Mr. Leung Yu-chung, over 200 to 300 vacancies for doctors. The government should seriously train local doctors, train up local doctors, instead of relying on this limited registration system to make up the shortfall. The major efforts should be about training up local doctors, not limited registration. Every year, we have 400 and 500 medical graduates, but the same number, or more or less the same number, would be retiring every year. So you need to build up the so-called pool of doctors through other efforts. We have 100 or so doctors with limited registration, but as Dr. Pierre Chan, only 10 odd are working for the HA now. And they have not worked for the HA for more than a year. So is there any scientific basis for the changing the period from 1 year to 3 years, and that would enable you to attract more overseas doctors to work in Hong Kong? In the past, most of them would be allowed for renewal of registration. So why do you think this would work? Well, of course, we mainly rely on local medical graduates. At the lowest point, it was only 25 medical graduates every year, and now we have at most 470 every year. And we need to address the question of a shortage of doctors, and one of the means is through the limited registration. We are now allowing the Medical Council to decide the period to not more than 3 years. That would just take away some of the impediments at present. Do you have any objective criteria or data to tell you that with the extension of the period to 3 years, you will be able to get more limited registration doctors? We cannot be that specific as regards how many more doctors will be employed this way. But if the registration period is for 1 year, many people would have reservations. But that's the answer you have repeated. You are just saying that the new system is better, but there's no scientific basis for this suggestion. For this, the basis is this. We have to look at whether the existing arrangement is not adequate. If you offer a doctor, have you consulted them? Have they told you that 3 years would be better than 1 year? Have they told you that you will be able to attract more the overseas doctors if the period is 3 years? If you've done so, perhaps you can show us the evidence as in terms of some objective data. Now it's rather subjective. Now we have 400 odd medical graduates, but we also have the same number, 400 odd doctors due to out of who are no longer serving as doctors because of a brain drain, wastage, or retirement. Because there are also doctors leaving the HA to practice in the private sector as well. So we should not try to tackle this problem through some minor or the supplementary measures. Actually, HA, we have been trying to retain the work doctors who are already retired. And under the current arrangement, they can continue to work in the HA for 2 more years upon reaching the retirement age. And also for the Committee on Healthcare Manpower Planning, HA will be working on how to retain the doctors and how to engage retired doctors. And we should not rely on just one approach. We should have a multi-pronged approach. We want to keep retiring doctors to work, but at the same time, given the acute shortage of manpower, shouldn't we also do more in terms of limited registration, including extending the period of registration from not more than 1 year to not more than 3 years? Maybe this can help. But if you ask me exactly how helpful it is going to be, or we have to find out after it's been tried. All I'm saying that it takes a multi-pronged approach to tackle the problem. If, according to Mr. Leung Yu-chung, extending the limited registration period from 1 year to 3 years, will not be able to attract many more doctors. And then they don't have to worry that we are opening the floodgate. And if not many doctors will be attracted to come to work in Hong Kong, then let's give it a try, and they don't have to be worried. I think it's worth a trial. But I agree with Mr. Leung Yiu-chung. We should tackle the problem at source. We should significantly increase the number of medical students. We have read we have been given a report from the Healthcare Manpower Planning Committee. We really need to increase the number of medical graduates. That would be the solution. On the question of retired doctors, I think there are studies to see whether the retirement age should be extended. If a doctor is still considered very competent, although he or she has already reached the retirement age, the HA should try harder to retain them. As for the HA, one or two HA doctors with the HA, and according to Dr. Chen, not all of them are at the front line, because according to the HA system, if you have worked in the HA for more than, say, 10 years or 15 years, the doctors will no longer be working at the front line. So perhaps Mr. Sun can explain to us what do you mean by front-line duties? Are senior doctors not working at the front line? We are saying that these limited registration doctors should be engaged to provide the clinical services. So they may not just be a doctor in terms of rank. He or she may be a senior doctor or a consultant. But they will also be doing clinical duties. They will be providing care to patients. Am I correct? As Mr. Alice Mack has said, in the past few years, doctors employed under the limited registration system will be deployed for clinical services, because the starting point is that there is a shortage of doctors for the specialties concerned. The HA wants to employ doctors with limited registration to resolve the problem of shortage of manpower. So in the past few years, all these doctors have been deployed in clinical duties. So the facts should speak for themselves. So you should not allow people to mislead us. Please set out the facts. And they said in the past there were 300 or so the graduates, and you didn't employ them. Or there were 300 applicants, and the HA didn't employ all of them. So that goes to show that the criteria are stringent. So perhaps you can tell us the information about the reasons why some applicants were rejected, because there's so much information circulating around, some more factual than others. So the government should set out the facts for us, so that we know what the figures are about. Most of the doctors with limited registration who have been employed for a longer time are working for the universities. I don't quite understand why there are so many such doctors with limited registration working for the universities. Well, because apart from teaching duties, they may also be teaching in the hospitals, or they are providing some clinical services. For these experienced professors working in Hong Kong, are they all working for a long time? Please tell us that that we are not allowing overseas doctors to take up the positions for local doctors for a long time after the period of registration is extended to 3 years. Mr. Chen Hangpan, first round. there's a subcommittee meeting next door. So I was there, but I also monitor what's going on here. There are a lot of misunderstandings. It's been claimed that we are going to admit many mainland doctors, but it's an exaggeration.
Last year, we've discussed about this a number of times. The extension to not exceeding 3 years, I think we need that. Well, from completing the studies to being a specialist, it will take easily 10 years. You may think that it's better to train our own doctors. Of course, that's good, but we have an imminent need for more doctors. And in some areas, there is a serious wastage. It's a matter of urgency. So increasing it to no more than 3 years is warranted. I would even ask the administration to consider more providing more incentive to doctors in countries with a similar system to come here. In relation to limited registration, we think that if the period is increased to no more than 3 years, this will be an incentive. So this is our first step. The power to approve and the standard adopted by the MCHK will remain unchanged. Some members mention about mainland doctors. Mr. Sun has made it very clear that on the mainland they don't have any specialist qualification, so there is no mainland doctors can't practice here. Well, I'm sure after today, because of this of the fear mongering, some people who have not listened to the entire meeting might just take things out of context and believe some members. I ask the administration to constantly disseminate the full picture so that some members of the public will not be misled by some by misleading remark, which in turn affects the operation of the bill. Any reply? None. Mr. Leung Kwok Kong speaking for the second time. This is like a court. There is examination and cross-examination. I asked you, you said it's impossible for them to practice medicine here if they are recruited by the 2 universities. Then the only place where they would practice medicine would be the 2 teaching hospitals and not outside. Yes or no? I meant they cannot practice medicine as they wish because they are recruited by the 2 universities. That Hong Kong U doctor was quite senior. No one thought that he would do operation as well. This is a wrong example. No? Well, you can't just say use the example of the Hong Kong U doctor practicing outside because he, in the first place, is not a limited registration doctor. You have used my time. No, I have the duty to point out where you're wrong. Well, our chairman always does us a disservice. You said that someone's recruited by the two universities, that person may practice medicine in the two teaching hospitals because practicing outside is not allowed. So I ask you, well, what if that person leaves the university or someone goes to the university to ask for treatment from that doctor? Mr. Sun, I have already answered. Say, the two universities recruit a non-locally trained doctor of limited registration. So it's the employee of the two universities. The work will be related to the two organizations. So the two universities said that, well, now I recruit you. And someone comes to that doctor or the university said that, well, he's the best we have. Can you cure him? Mr. Leung, if you have a specific example in mind, you may raise that, and I will ask the two universities. I can answer you under the legal framework. Well, that person can practice medicine, but with limitation, but with the consent of the organization, he may practice outside. Say that there is a restriction. You can't practice medicine outside our university. Otherwise, it's ultra-virus. Make it very clear to us. I've asked a lot of people. You can't rule the possibility that when the two universities give an approval, then that person can practice medicine outside the university. Is there a possibility? Well, if you ask a specific question, I will forward your question to the MCHK and the two universities. Consent is a very vague term. If you have a very specific case, forward it to me and I will ask the questions for you. I give you the answer based on the legal framework. But if you refer to a specific case, what consent, under what circumstance is the consent given? If you have a specific case, you give it to us. CUHK, HKU, the two faculties of medicine, stipulates that the person cannot work outside the two universities, whether to teach or to provide medical treatment. Otherwise, it's ultra-virus. It's not about consent. It's whether the law states that the two universities can abuse that power. It's recorded. It will be released on Facebook. You can watch it this evening. Legal advisor, can you help? I can ask the third time. I think the question was doctors of limited registration. Can the organization that recruits them allow them to practice as in the private sector? Perhaps you will let the legal advisor answer you. Under Section 14A bracket C, there is a definition of limited registration about the term, and the registration is on what type of work. So it depends on the consent of the duties that the person is recruited for. But I can't answer that. Well, I can't rule the possibility of that happening. That means it will happen. I can't say that. If he says very clearly, then that can't happen. But if it's for the organization to decide, then there is discretion. Well, if you say that the law doesn't make it clear, that means that there is a doubt. So, Mr. Su, what you said is right, and what I said was also right. I will write to the Department of Justice to ask about the meaning of the law, of the piece of legislation. You have to queue up again. You're repeating yourself. Mr. Michael Tian, speaking for the first time. Well, there are doctors of limited registration joining the HA. The number is small. They come from all over the world, from other countries and from the mainland as well. So far, there is no evidence showing that they are better or worse than their local counterparts. Any assessment done? The impression people get is that mainland doctors are very different from from local ones. There is no guarantee about quality. So how are they compared to overseas doctors, other doctors? Any specific cases are showing that they're different? Let me clarify once again. In the past few years, the HA recruits doctors through limited registration to fill vacancies. They will consider, if you consider their specialist qualification, none of them came from the mainland, because at the moment there is no specialist qualification recognized on the mainland. They from UK, US, Canada, Australia and New Zealand mainly. So, doctors of limited registration working in the HA, if you look at where they have obtained their specialist qualification, none of them came from the mainland. They came from other overseas places. They did not come from the mainland because there is no specialist training on the mainland. So for the extension to 3 years, still they won't be able to churn out any specialist doctors. Well, we would like the doctors to be recruited to come from a similar system. So mainly they will come from UK, US, Australia and New Zealand. Then how come some people will say that you're opening the gate to allow mainland doctors to come here? Because in the future that still will not happen. And I think you've mixed two up. For non-locally trained doctor working in Hong Kong, there are two ways. One through limited registration. The other one is to sit for the licentiate examination. Anyone can apply to sit the examination. Some of them might be from the mainland. And if they pass the licentiate examination, then, well, if they pass the examination, it doesn't really matter where they come from, because there is one examination only. And if it's not done through examination, you will have to look at their specialist qualification. There has never been any mainland doctors because there is no specialist training on the mainland. So with the relaxation to 3 years, even if there are more doctors coming from outside Hong Kong, then they would not be coming from the mainland. That's right. But it seems that you have never disseminated this piece of information. Well, hopefully then you will post about this on Facebook for people to know. Then I don't know why we're here arguing. I now understand. Mr. Leung Kwok Hong, why do you raise your hand? To ask questions? This will be your third time. We only have 1 minute before 6:30. Well, I will adjourn the meeting.